you know, no matter what profession that you're in, there's always going to be people that don't hold the standards, right? That or the expectations of what you're supposed to do inside that profession. So let's take an example: the doctor that molested all those girls at Michigan State, right? That guy is a monster.
Right.
And he took the Hippocratic oath to help people, right? And he abused his power, and he abused, his profession to do what he did. But now everybody doesn't think that every doctor is evil now, right?
Right. Right.
So when you have people who hold very powerful positions like you do in law enforcement, like, we have a tremendous responsibility, and that responsibility can do a couple of things. It could take somebody's freedom away from them, which there's not many more powerful things that you can do in an occupation. Like, you can literally take somebody's freedom from them for a certain period of time. Then obviously it's up to the judicial system to figure that stuff out. Or you can kill someone. You could take their life. And when you have people who take the job for the wrong reasons and you give them that type of power, some bad things can happen. And then you have really good people who make bad decisions, right? And the results are someone loses their life. And then you have police officers with the right intentions, with the right training, with the good heart, who have to protect good people from bad people, and sometimes people lose their life. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into being a cop, and it's a very difficult job. It really
Right.
is. That's why we're kind of where we are right now, because there's just so much that goes into it, and there's so much distrust, and sometimes a lot of people don't understand the laws, and that's why I think these conversations are really necessary, because there's also bad cops. And we, as good police officers, need to do a better job to step up and say, hey, you know what? Like, I wear that shield too. And what that guy did in Minnesota just made my job a hell of a lot harder, and a heck of a lot more dangerous. And my wife has to go to sleep every night, or when I leave the house every morning, she has to think about, am I coming home? So, I think there's a lot of conversations that need to happen on both sides. And the only way to do that is for people like us to just sit down and have level heads and talk about experiences and talk about what we think the solution can be. Because we know there's a problem, right? And we can keep pointing the fingers at the problems, but how do we come up with solutions? It's a very volatile conversation or topic to speak about. But I believe that if you're coming from a place of goodness and you have love in your heart and your intentions are pure, these conversations have to be made in order for us to get to a better place. And at the end of the day, I want this world, my kids, to grow up in a better place than I did. And this is the only way to do it.
You just ended with the statement of, that this makes your job that much harder. Like, since everything has happened, what kind of tension have you felt as a police officer?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I've had a really, really rough week, because in my family, my sister's just recently got married to her new husband, Jared, and he happens to be African American. And my brother is gay. So they seem to be on the side, what would be opposite law enforcement. And it's sad to say that a line has been drawn, unfortunately. And it seems as if right now you're either on one side or you're on the other. And I think it's possible to be pro law enforcement and against bad cops. I think it's possible to be for the saying that Black Lives Matter, but still be pro police, right? So for me, it's been really hard, because my sister's been marching at marches with her husband. My brother's been marching, but neither one of them have picked up the phone to call me and say, hey man, listen, just be safe out there. Or neither one of them has posted a photo of me in uniform and said, hey, like, this is one of the good guys. My brother's doing some good out there. So it's hurtful, in a sense, though. That's my family. So I've had a really hard time this week emotionally, but when it comes to like the job, you have to be on your toes, because even though I work in a small town, bad things happen there. So you can't become, complacent and think that it's not going to happen in your town, because it will. And I have other cops that, who I'm friends with, or, family members that are working in, like I have friends that are down in Manhattan right now, and they're getting hit in the face with rocks and bottles and stuff like that. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
real. It's bad right now. It's really bad. I'm about a half hour north of Manhattan in the suburbs. So
Okay.
I'm just outside of Manhattan, about a half hour north in Westchester County. Listen, it's been a very educational experience, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I reached out to Jamal King 2 days ago.
Mm.
Jamal, 9 to 5
Mhm.
millionaire,
Yeah.
because I was having such a hard time this week just processing everything, and I wanted to speak to someone who, A, is African American, but B, is also a police officer. I want to know like what they're feeling. I want to know the pain that they're feeling, and so we had a really nice conversation, and he taught me, he spoke to me about a lot of stuff that I had no idea about. And again, I
Mhm.
think that's part of bridging the gap, is educating yourself. Listen, I am
Right.
white. I'm not black. I don't know. I don't know about all the things that happened, from the time that, the civil rights movement. I don't know about that stuff. So I'm always open to listen and learn and educate. I think that's the only way we're going to, like I said, bridge the gap and start to come together and fix this thing, is if we both understand the other side.
Right. Do you work with predominantly Black neighborhood?
No, so I work in just the opposite. So I work in
Okay.
the town in which I grew up in, and although there's diversity in the town, you have African Americans, you have Spanish. It's a very small part of it. So there's not a lot of there isn't a lot of, like, I wouldn't say there's like a really bad neighborhood, or an urban community or anything like that. Like, you go into some of these cities, the South Side of Chicago, New York City, Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn. We don't have anything like that where I'm in the suburbs.
Right. So do
Um,
you feel prepared
we
to
don't have.
interact? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I feel prepared to interact, because I don't look at anybody and judge them by the color of their skin. So I look at you, and you're just another person. So
Mhm.
if I'm having issues interacting with you, then there's this perception that you're somehow different because you're black. Right. So
Mhm.
that's never affected me in that manner. So I could go into, I feel like, as if I could go into anywhere and have a conversation with someone, because I'm just talking to another person,
Yeah,
if
I
that
get
makes sense.
that. That makes a lot of sense. But I think that, I was talking to Joe the other day, and we were talking about implicit bias and the cultural diversity training. How often have you had the cultural diversity training?
I don't think we've had it,
Wow.
to be quite honest with you. Like, now the academy is always evolving. Okay. So I went to the police academy 14 and a half years ago. Now, if they did any sort of like cultural training, it was very brief, because I don't really remember it. But I can't say that they don't do that right now, because I don't know. I'm not in the academy anymore. I haven't been back there in 14 and a half years. No, and that's not to say that in the Bronx or Brooklyn or Chicago or Detroit or any of these places, at Georgia, or that they don't do that. Every
Right.
department has different policies and procedures and training and all that other stuff. So just because one town might not do it, doesn't mean that, law enforcement doesn't do it across the board.
Do you, like, when you say that you had the talk with Jamal the other day? I'm sure that did you all talk about any like cultural things, like things from the past of Black citizens that gave you more insight as an officer that you think would help you see things a little differently, I guess? That's like when I think of cultural
Well,
diversity training, that same thing could benefit officers. And I feel like, we're like, as a society, pissed off at the police officers right now, where perhaps the training is not adequate to equip them with how to deal with different cultures. Because for me, like for
Yeah,
instance,
listen,
I know for
that's
me, I grew up in Chicago, and I've also been in predominantly white situations. I went to school at the University of Iowa, and I know that, you know, there's certain ways that I had to adapt the way that I carry myself so that people don't see me as aggressive, so that people don't see my responses as having an attitude. And that could come into play in a police stop. Like if I'm a person that speaks loudly, or I, you know, use my head when I talk, or use my hands a lot when I talk, that can come off as aggressive. And if that's something that's not addressed with people who have never really lived in a predominantly Black community, that might be something that they're intimidated, you know, increases the level of anxiety in those interactions.
Yeah, listen, that's 100% valid. You know, I'm Italian, so people tell me all the time, "Why are you so loud?" And I'm like, "It's just the way I talk." So it's very similar. I'm a very passionate, loud. I'm in shape, so I come across as very aggressive. You know, especially when I'm passionate, about something. So yeah, listen, that's a completely 100% valid critique or statement. That is one of the ways that law enforcement can probably, or could possibly do a better job in teaching someone who hasn't come across contact with that many African Americans, or who hasn't come across that. Like, listen, if you're from Latin America, or if you're from Mexico, like, you don't talk to the police because they're so corrupt down there. Like, they'll slit your throat and bury you somewhere and twice about it. So, you might be coming across as you deal with somebody, from Guatemala or from South America. They want nothing to do with you, and you could be looking at it as it's a sign of disrespect, but meanwhile, it's just a sign of their culture. It's how they do things. So yeah, 100%. That's one of the ways that we can probably start to, if we were creating a list, that could be one of the things at the top of the list, to say, okay, listen, if we want to start fixing this thing, this is one of the things that we need to do.
Right, right. When I was looking at another thing, like if we're talking about that list, I was looking at an article on one of the officers who just got arrested from the George Floyd incident, and it was his fourth day on the job. How prepared were you for what law enforcement entails on your first week on the job?
So there's a lot of things that goes into
by no
the
means
police
am I making an excuse for him. I think he's responsible for sure.
No.
For sure.
Sure. Yeah. So your the normal police academy is about 6 months. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Could training be longer? Yes. Right. There's no way. There's so much stuff that goes into law enforcement. There's no way you could possibly go over everything and feel completely 100% confident, okay, in all your knowledge of the law, and being practical inside that law in 6 months. It's impossible. So there is a lot of learning that goes on the street, right? When you're in the police academy and you're doing a staged scenario, it's not the same as walking into somebody's house when shit's going down, right? It's completely different. So, as a rookie cop, when you are placed with someone like that cop was, you are trusting that other officer is going to have your best intentions in mind, because he is your training officer, right? So, you go on the street and you're there for 4 days. You do not know everything. You are not ready for everything. Like, you could be in 20 years and be like, that's the first time I've ever seen that. Like, that's the type of stuff that, the law enforcement, there's such a wide, range of things that can happen. So when you're choosing who your training officers are, those training officers should be the most level-headed, okay, some of the most knowledgeable, okay, and somebody who's a really good communicator, because you are teaching on the job. Now, I feel really bad for that 4-day-old cop that he got placed in that situation, and his training officer happened to be that guy. But there also comes a point where you shouldn't need a training officer to tell you that something's wrong, right? So I'll tell you right up off the bat, like when you handcuff somebody on their belly, you are taught in the academy that you cannot keep them on their belly. You are taught that you have to sit them, roll them over and sit them up, because just their own body weight laying on the ground could cause asphyxiation, because your lungs cannot expand and contract the way they should, because you have the weight of a body on top. You know, your body weight's there, especially when your hands are behind your back. So we're taught to roll the person over, sit him up. Now his police car was right there. He could have sat him up, stood him up, and put him right inside the police car, and then there's no more threat. He's in the car with he's handcuffed in a car. Why he didn't do that, I have no idea. That's what's so weird to me. He was right by the car. He didn't get in a foot pursuit and run a mile away from his police car. He was leaning on his car, which is so crazy to me, right? But there comes a point where at some time between 30 seconds and 9 minutes, that one of those other 3 cops that were there needs to say, dude, let's go, man. We got to sit him up and put him in the car. It doesn't matter. I don't care if you're on the job for 1 day or 20 years. Somebody needs to know that, right? So they all failed. I know for sure, 100% fact, that if I was on that stop or if I was on that arrest, George Floyd would be alive and the country would not be rioting and those other cops would still have their job. 1,000% without a doubt, because I never would have let that happen. So for some strange reason, that cop did what he did, and there happened to be 3 cops there that did nothing. It's like the perfect storm. And that's why we are where we are right now. Wow. It only would have taken one person to save all their lives.
Right. So have you ever been in that situation where you had to talk to another officer and let them know, hey, you're going a little too far?
So I've been a cop for 14 and a half years. We don't have any black police officers in my department, right? And people could say, like, how is that possible? Well, in order to become a police officer in my town, you have to live there, okay? No black resident has ever applied for the job. Mm-hmm. So that's why there's no black cops there. You have to be a resident. So in the 14 and a half years that I've been a police officer, I've never had to step in and tell somebody, yo, slow down, because that's not how we operate in my police department. We're a community police department, right? You know, I work with exceptional men and women on a daily basis that go out of their way, to help the community. Now, do bad things happen there, and do we have to take action? Yes, absolutely. But for most law enforcement officers, it's just a job. Like for me, I've always said this. I'm a police officer, 24 hours a day, but I'm a police officer for 8 hours. And then when I leave, I'm just Joe. Right now, if I have to act when I'm off duty, I'm going to act. I'm a police officer, but I don't take the badge as it's like part of who I am or makes me who I am. It's just part of who I am. I'm fortunate enough that I've never really had to, be completely hands-on with somebody. I'm very good with my words. I treat people the right way. I have good command presence. I speak to people like they're human beings, right? I was 27 years old when I was hired. I wasn't a kid, right? I had many jobs before I was a police officer. I had a family before I was married. I had a child before I was a police officer. So I know what it's like to go into somebody's house when they're fighting with their wife and be empathetic and understand and not boss people around. Now, listen, there comes a point where when people don't listen to you, you have to be assertive and you have to say, listen, I'm in charge here. But for the most part, if you just see, what people don't understand is that for the most part in law enforcement, you see people and their worst, right? Is anybody calling the cops to come over for a cup of coffee? No, right? So either somebody's calling for help, right? Or a crime has been committed. That's normally when you see the police. Right. So you see really good people sometimes in their worst days, fighting with their wife. Maybe they're one of them is, stepped out on the other one, or maybe somebody lost their job, or maybe a child's sick and the stress levels are high, or maybe somebody has a drinking problem. There's all these different circumstances. So you have to go in as a law enforcement officer and you can't right away try to escalate the situation. Your job is to de-escalate the situation. right? And you do that by using your words.
Right. So do you all like see a difference with police officers who work in communities that they don't live in? Because it seems like you have a vested interest in the community that you live in because you're a part of it. So do you think that perhaps there's more tension when an officer, for instance, say you live there and then you work in an inner city neighborhood?
Well, I think that, I think it's human nature probably to care about something a little bit more that you're involved in, right? I think that's just no matter what your job is. So you have to be you have to be a resident to get hired in my department, and then afterwards you don't have to live there anymore. So not every police officer still lives in the town, but in order to get hired there, you have to be a resident. Okay, so I live about a half hour north of where I work right now. But, there's a lot of police officers that still live in the town. And yeah, sure, you're really going to care about the level of, I think you're going to care about the level of crime a little bit more. You're going to care about your relationships that you build a little bit more, because when you go to the store the next morning and you're getting your coffee, you're going to see the person that you were in their house last night. And that's happened a bunch of times. Like, so you don't want to be that guy that goes into a house and is a complete jerk. And then you go to get a sandwich the next morning, and that guy that you were jerked to is standing online, and you're no longer in uniform. So I think that, for somebody, who just goes to work and doesn't really, and doesn't have to deal with that particular area or neighborhood after they get off of work, then yeah, I think they're going to care a little bit less, 100%. Because I want to help educate them on how to deal with law enforcement, but I also want to get their side of it, because I don't work in a neighborhood like that. So some of the questions that I ask the kids are, do you guys see the same police officers all the time in your communities? Because that is, I think, important. Because if I'm going to be in a neighborhood or in a community, I want to know the kids, right? I want to get to know them. I want to build a relationship with them, because I want them to feel comfortable around me, and I want them to come to me when they need help. Right. But if there's always a revolving door of police officers, and you don't have 100% trust, and you don't feel comfortable with a specific officer, it's going to make it that much more difficult. If you're in the inner city and you're seeing police coming in all the time and either locking people up because they're committing crimes or this or that, you're going to have a different perspective on law enforcement. And I think there's dialogue that has to go on both sides. And when I was speaking to those kids, especially in Atlanta, I said, like, listen, I believe if you see the same cop, like, it's his job. He should get out of the car. He should introduce himself to you. And you see all these videos that are going around and going viral of, like, officers playing basketball, or officers, like, singing with the kids. And, there's one side of it that says, bravo, officer, great job. But then there's the other side of it that says, that's not our job. We shouldn't be doing that. No, you're wrong. We should be doing that. Right? Mm-hmm. We should be doing that. Now, it doesn't always have to go on social media, but we should be getting out of the car. We should be introducing ourselves. We should be getting to know who the kids are.
Going back to the George Floyd situation, you said that if you had been there, he would have still been alive, and, the other officers would not be in jail because you would have stopped the situation. What can we do, like, as a society? How can we empower good cops to step up and hold the bad cops accountable, or help prevent things from like this from happening before it gets to this point? Like, I'm pretty sure the cops that are good know the ones that have that temper or have that switch, or, take things too far. Those people in his department probably knew he was like this before this happened. And I looked him up, and he had 18 infractions, but only 2 disciplinary actions. 2 of them that had like a consequence attached to it.
Yeah.
So what can be done, like, for things like that?
There needs to be accountability there. Like, there should have been either retraining or, going through like another psychological exam, right? Because people don't, like, I took a 96-page test, right? And you're sitting there for hours, and like the second or third question could have been the same exact question asked on like the 95th page, right? So we went through a really rigorous test, and then they take those tests and they give it to a psychiatrist, and you get hooked up to a lie detector, and you go over the answers to your test, right? So it's really hard to, like, really hard to kind of like lie or BS your way through it, because if there's sort of indiscrepancies, that it doesn't make sense. They try to weed out the people that are full of it, right? But maybe there are some people that slip through the cracks, right? And it's up to the administration, right? So law enforcement is a paramilitary organization, right? It's run very similar to the military, right? Mm-hmm. So you have people that have to answer to. Patrol answers to the sergeant will answer to the lieutenant will answer to the captain answers to the chief, right? So I think it's on administration that when you have these officers that are repeat offenders, is that there's some remediation that needs to take place. And and now there's so much transparency. Like back in the day, listen, I can only speak for the 14 and a half years that I've been a police officer, right? My experience, okay? You can't sweep things under the carpet anymore, right? Because everything is out in the open. There's cameras everywhere, body cameras, audio cameras, car cameras, people's cell phones, like everything is getting caught on camera. So the days of sweeping things under the rug, I think for the most part are gone. But yeah, do I believe that officers who, now listen, I'm not going to work next to some guy that's doing that stuff, that's going to put my life in jeopardy, that's going to put my pension, that's going to put my benefits, that's going to put my family's livelihood at jeopardy. That's not going to happen, because he goes down, he does something, and I'm there's a good chance that I'm going down with him. And I don't care about the thin blue line or thin blue wall of silence or whatever people want to call it. A person I work with is not going to be more important to me than my wife and my 3 children.
So I think a lot of people speak up and tell people, you're able to speak up and say, hey, I'm not working with this person. You feel
listen, yeah, I think listen, sure. I've been fortunate enough. I think we have a really, really good police department filled with some really good guys and females that, I haven't had that experience where I've had to do that yet. But would I step up and be like, hey, listen, we got a problem? Yeah. And I think it's going to take more people like that, and then you have to hope that the other police officers that are in the department aren't going to shun that one cop that's willing to stand up. If we all are on the same page that listen, you know what, if I'm a good guy and I got 15 good guys standing right next to me and there's one bad apple, then all 15 of those guys need to stand up and be like, listen, you're not going to ruin it for the rest of us. And that's what's happening right now. Right. So we have to hold ourselves accountable and we have to hold the others accountable. But it's the same way. It's the same way that we have to look at. See, I believe, and I preach with all my athletes, and you're a coach too. So I would imagine you preach the same thing. Extreme ownership, right? Accountability for your own actions. Right. Now, make no mistake. All right. I don't want any of my words to get twisted here. George Floyd was murdered. Okay, by that police officer. Mm-hmm. But George Floyd, if you look at his history and his rap sheet, George Floyd's behavior put him in a place for a bad cop to do what he did. Like there's a pattern there, right? So now, just 2 days ago, we had a shooting 15 minutes from where I work. African-American, I think he was 24, was shot and killed by the police. Everybody's up in arms, right? His brother's on the news. My brother was murdered. His brother just got out of jail for robbery. There was a car stop. He got out, ran on foot. Cops tased him. Taser didn't work. He pulled out a loaded 9mm handgun and pointed it at the police. The police shot and killed him. Like but nobody wants to talk about that. We're just talking about that the police killed a black man. And that's what's getting put on the news. They didn't even mention the gun. So we have to be willing on both sides to talk about the accountability and the ownership of the actions and how each case individually is different. Okay. Now, again, George Floyd, whether he had a past, was trying to pass a fake $20 bill, had drugs in his system, that does not excuse that cop for doing what he did. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But George Floyd put himself in a place for that to happen, right? So if we're going to start educating our kids, and we're going to start educating police, and we're going to start asking for police to make adjustments, then we have to start asking communities to make adjustments. We have to teach our kids that if you're going to conduct yourself in criminal behavior, this is what could happen to you, right? So there's education that has to happen on both sides.
Right, but nonviolent offense like passing a $20 bill, regardless of what his past was, you know, whether he had a past or not, you know, I still don't think that makes this officer the judge and the executioner.
No.
And yeah, a $20 bill, like how much is a life worth?
Oh, I mean, come on. That's why I said it's murder. Yeah. There's no, it's insane that for somebody, you know, to try to be passing a $20 bill to get killed for that. That's absurd. The same thing with Ahmaud Arbery, right? If those racist, I don't want to call them rednecks because I don't want to, those racist father and son, whatever you want to call them, believe that he was going into people's houses, burglarizing people's houses. If that was their belief, okay? Now, there's video that shows him in a house that he wasn't supposed to be in, right? But if that was their belief, it was not their job to be the police, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. It was not their job. So what? He went into somebody's house. Even if he took a television, so what? It's a TV. You call the police and you say, I think I might have just witnessed a burglary, and you let the law take care of it. Those guys decided to be the law, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. You can't do that. For what? Because he might have stole a television? So now a young man is dead because maybe he stole a TV? Maybe he was inside that house looking for food because he hadn't eaten in a week. Right?
Or maybe he was just looking. There was a white couple that went in that house, the same house, and nobody's saying that they maybe had taken a TV or maybe had, you know, done anything, had criminal intent. There's no reason to just say that because he was black that he had criminal intent. I've gone in houses that were construction houses,
and that's why. And that's why you have people saying that, you know, people saying that racism still exists, because it does. Yeah. Right? You know, I believe that those two men down there were racist. Right?
Do you think people can be racist and not know they're racist? Like people who say they're not racist and still have those racial tendencies?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Listen, if you are preconditioned to something and it's just part of the fabric of how you grew up, could you possibly not know that it's a wrong thing? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not a psychology major.
Right.
It could be. You know, but listen, I know that the world is evolving, and the world is not. I don't think the United States of America is what is being depicted right now. I think it's a piece of it. So my father grew up in the Bronx, and at a time where if you were African American, you couldn't come into the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't allowed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was in elementary school when they desegregated the schools and started busing kids up to my elementary school from Getty Square in Yonkers. Right. I've grown up through some of these times, and my father grew up at a time where racism was deep rooted, you know. But my father gave his daughter's hand in marriage to an African American young man, right? We've had a black president of the United States. We have black athletes and actors and actresses and musical artists that are making millions and millions of dollars and are the faces of their organizations, and kids idolize them. So I think we've come a long way. Do we have a lot further to go? Yes, we do, right? 100%. But I think it starts at home, right? Like, how do we kill racism? We teach that it doesn't exist in our house. You can't, if somebody makes a racist joke or a comment in front of you, you can't just be silent anymore. You have to tell them, dude, that's not cool. I don't want to hear that shit anymore. Right? That's the only way. So can we all do a better job in that? Yeah, we can. right? But we live in a society where we don't want to say things that make people feel uncomfortable, or we don't want to say things that puts us in an uncomfortable position. But you know what? You know this better than anybody. Growth only comes when you're uncomfortable, or when you're comfortable being uncomfortable. So listen, you want to be a racist? Like, that's not cool. You're not going to do that around me. Like, I'm not going to tolerate or stand for that. So if I see a police officer that I'm working with that's doing shit because because of the color of somebody's skin, they're going to know about it. More people have to stand up and be that way. I think we're getting there. This was the first time, I think, that everybody was on the same page. Everybody looked at this incident with George Floyd and was like, yo, there's no gray area here. Like, there's no gray area here. So with like Michael Brown, there was a gray area.
There have been some people who have, like, I don't know if it's because of the rioting and things like that, that they're like going on the other side, but I hear so many more people standing up against the rioting than are standing up that are not saying anything wrong with the murder. You know, they're so quick to say that the rioting is wrong, but aren't saying anything with the murder.
And I'm not excusing them for that, but I'm just going to give you maybe a little bit of an explanation, because I think everybody was on the same page that the murder was bad, right? I don't have to, like, if you kill a child, I don't have to tell you that was really bad. You killed a child, right? Everybody. I never saw more law enforcement come out and denounce another cop faster than they did with this cop regarding George Floyd. I think you had law enforcement, politicians, athletes, everybody was like, this is really bad. That cop just murdered him in broad daylight on camera. Bad. I think for the one time, we had a tremendous opportunity to come together and agree on this and say, all right, you know what? We got a problem. How do we fix it? And I think a lot of that momentum was lost because of all the looting and the rioting. And people are like, you know what? This is not right. And now people are trying to justify it because of the pain and anger. And people are like, no, you can't just. Now all of a sudden we have this division again, right? We have this gray area, what's right and what's wrong, where we didn't have that on the murder. Right? So I think we had this tremendous opportunity, but I think it got dealt a blow because of all the aftermath that was going on. I personally think that.
I think that, you know, the aftermath actually, not that I support looting or rioting at all, but I think, in my opinion, that it sped up the process because no arrests were made prior to the outrage. You know, even though everybody said it was wrong, none of the officers were arrested before the rioting started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen,
so.
and listen, I can't. I don't know why that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know why how they let that long go by. Like, but that's not on. I guess you could say it's on the system of police. That's not on the cops, right? The higher ups need to do that stuff. The mayor or the district attorney needs to bring those charges on. Like, that's like, police were not justifying that. Cops were not saying, well, no, he possibly. Nobody was saying that. So why they waited so long, I don't know. There's a lot of theories that go out. Listen, I don't know, but I just know that it seems as if right now, with some of the things that are going on, it's like the world wants us to be fighting each other right now, and we're very divisive, and it's a very volatile time right now. And I think the only thing that can fix all this stuff is us coming together, not fighting, right? That's not gonna, what is a race war gonna solve? What is a pro-police, anti-police war gonna solve? That's not gonna solve anything.
I think the trainings would be a good place to start. Like when you say things moving forward, we talked about like the diversity training, cultural diversity, and then you brought up the mental evaluation. So is that only when you're hired that you get the mental evaluation?
Yeah, so you take your psychological exam when you get hired, and I would imagine if they're, I'm not even going to say that because I don't know it. But one would think that if somebody is showing some sort of behaviors, they would revisit that. But, in 14 and a half years, I've had this psychological evaluation just in the beginning when I got hired. But then again, I don't have, I only have one complaint on my record in 14 and a half years. And that was because, a woman was upset that I gave her a ticket and told her that next time, maybe if she was a little bit nicer, she wouldn't have got the ticket. So, so I haven't been put in that situation. So I just know that we took the psychological exam when we got hired, and then I haven't been, I haven't had to take it again.
Right. Right. Now, the
Listen,
job is pretty traumatic, correct? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, the job is very traumatic, right? You see a lot of really bad things, right?
Yeah.
The average person, having to do mouth to mouth on an infant or mouth to mouth on a 2-year-old toddler with his crying parents in the background, that's traumatizing, right? Listen, I have a friend of mine who was the first officer on scene when a father shot and killed his 2 daughters, shot and killed his 2 dogs, and then shot and killed himself, and he was the first one, at the scene, and he had to see these 2 little girls in bed holding their teddy bears, right? That's traumatizing. That stuff like that can change a person. They do have places where you can go for help, but that's the other thing too, is that the amount of law enforcement officers that are killing themselves in the past year is insane, right? It's a job that, it's dangerous on so many levels. Like, just a quick stat, and this is, this is not to say, right, wrong, or indifferent, but this is just some statistics on policing, right? So in 2019, 1,004 people were shot. So there was 1,004 shootings in law enforcement in 2019. And you would think there'd be a lot more, right?
The officers were shot, or they shot civilians?
No, this is in 2019, 1,004 civilians were shot by law enforcement. Out of those 1,004, 41 of them were unarmed. Okay, out of those 41 that were unarmed, 10 of them were black, 20 of them were white. In 2019, 89 police officers were killed. Think about that, right? So 41 unarmed civilians shot, 89 officers killed, right? So you have officers that are, that are involved in shootings. That's traumatizing. You have officers that are involved in knowing police officers that were killed. That's traumatizing. You have all the other types of calls that police go to. Like I told somebody the other day, the last thing a police officer wants to do is pull out his gun. That's a really bad day. And those are the words they tell you in the police academy. Like if you have to pull your gun out of your holster, it's a really bad day, right? So people are not yoked up to go to work and be like, I can't wait to shoot somebody today. Like it's a bad day. And they tell us that when we pull out our guns and we point it at somebody, we better be 1,000% sure that we are doing the right thing. Because once we pull the trigger and that bullet gets released from the chamber, we cannot take it back, right? You can't say, oops, I'm sorry, and take it back, right? So you pull your gun out of a holster, it's a bad day. You have to fire that gun, it could possibly be one of the worst days of your life.
Wow.
Because nothing good is coming from that. Nothing good is coming from that. You're either taking somebody's life justly, and you're going to be changed forever. You're going to be taking somebody's life unjustly. Your life is going to be changed forever. You're going to be judged. Like it's bad. And I've been fortunate enough that in my 14 and a half years in my career that I haven't had to pull the trigger. And that's a blessing.
Right. Right. But even with what you're saying, with the amount of trauma that you guys experience, you would think that, more evaluations would be done periodically, because of the trauma that you experience, doing like CPR on a child and losing them, or like seeing, murdered bodies, like what you're describing, or seeing a partner killed. Those things can change that can cause PTSD, just like when you compare it to the military, like you did before, the same things that soldiers see in the field, officers are seeing. And then not only to protect the public, but like you said, so many officers, do you have a stat on that? Like how many officers are committing suicide? Do you know?
There's, I'll tell you right now.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that I was speaking to Jamal about, was the existence of PTSD within the Black community, right? And how, you know, because of oppression and because of slavery and because of poverty, like nothing was ever like, they were never given the tools and resources, you know, for them to get over that stuff. And they're dealing with PTSD and they're dealing with all this anger, and that sometimes it's hard for you to blame them because of that. The same way you couldn't blame military personnel because of, you know, who goes to war, you know, and comes back with PTSD. You give them all these resources, right? You got the VA hospital, and you allow them to get like loans or mortgages with 0% down or special financing, so on and so forth like that. But it's also the same thing with law enforcement. Like maybe that's one of the other ways that we can start to maybe, you know, help police officers who are having a hard time dealing with this, is to give them more availability and more resources.
Right, and that's a good point with the PTSD in the African American community. It is real. I saw something they called it post-traumatic slave syndrome, actually, because of the oppression that resulted as from being slaves and then being descendants of slaves, and you know the whole move for reparations, because they weren't given, or we weren't given, you know, that starting point, you know, after slavery or after the civil rights movement, nothing to say, you know, here's your monopoly money to get you started. Here's something to get you on your feet. And so we've constantly had to just be fighting and clawing our way up to the top and then pull back down. Even those that have made it, like, you know, athletes, that represents a small percentage, or even people who've made it on their own merits with their education. The majority of Blacks are still struggling in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I spoke to Jamal, and he was explaining that to me, and I was, you know, listening to a speech with Martin Luther King Jr. talking about, after the Emancipation Proclamation, like, you know, the slaves who were brought here to this country against their will, you know, that were stripped of their actual physical names, who were enslaved for so many years, and even when they were freed, they were just freed, like, to go into society and where half the people hated them to begin with. I never thought of it like that. Like I never looked at it as if like Jamal King, like I'm a Jamal King. He's like, King's not even my name. He goes, my family, my ancestors worked on the King plantation. That's how I got the name King. Like, he's like, I can't trace my family tree back beyond Mississippi. Like, so stuff like that. Like, if you're not taught that stuff, or if you don't know that, or if you don't have conversations about that stuff, you can never understand.
Right.
So maybe we start teaching that in the schools a little bit more, right? Too, as well. Just real quick, just getting back to what you were saying before.
Yeah.
I found the stat in 2019, 228 police officers took their own life. So 89 police officers were shot and killed. 229 took their own life. So, you know, what's the answer to that? I don't know. It's got to be involved. Stress has to be involved in it, right?
Right. And they're doing a disservice to the police department, to the officers, in my opinion, by not giving you guys psychological evaluations. Because I know from working with troubled kids that people who are in trouble emotionally are not going to, most times they're not going to ask for help. So you're saying that things are there for them to go and get help, but people don't usually go and just ask for help. It, you know, it needs to be offered. It needs to be almost demanded that they go and get it. Someone saying, look, I noticed these changes in you. You need to go and sit and talk to someone to talk about what you've experienced and what you're going through.
I don't know what it's like to go into an inner city and work, you know, and be a police officer in a city where people hate you, right? My partner does. He's ESU, and my business partner, my other job. He's also a police officer. We met in the police academy. He's on the emergency services unit for another police department, and he says even if somebody calls 911, when the cops get there, they're mother effing them. He says they hate them, and you know, that's not healthy either. Like, you're never going to get the police to look at you differently if you hate them. And then it just keeps going back and forth, and we just keep spinning our wheels, and we stay in the same place. So both sides, I think, need to do Like, good cops need to denounce and call out the bad cops in a department. Law-abiding citizens in urban communities need to denounce and call out the bad citizens that are dealing the drugs, that are running the guns, that are doing the gangs, right? And if we both can trust each other, right, it comes down to trust. If I know that the police, if I can trust that the police are going to protect me, then maybe I'm a little bit more willing to open up my mouth here. But then you have other people saying, "Oh, you're a snitch," and then on the police side, right? If I'm willing to trust that the community is not going to hate me, right, just because I wear a badge, then maybe I'm more willing to point out and denounce the bad cops and point them out. But then I have other cops that call me a snitch. So there's so much dynamic to it, right? That's why it's so hard, right? Because you're damned if you say something and you're damned if you don't, on both sides. Right, on both sides. So
we've dug even deeper into a hole that we have to get out of with repairing the relationships with trust between the police officers and the community. Because if we see, like, I see so many kids right now, youth, and what they're posting on Instagram, you see the fear. You see that, we've taught youth for so many years that, if you get pulled over, be compliant, listen to what's said, and you'll come out okay. And now they're like, okay, this man did what he was told and he still didn't come out okay. He was still killed. So what does that mean for me? What am I going to do when I'm pulled over?
So I'm so angry at the police officers who are involved in this because of that, right? It's such a horrible act that stole the trust of so many people. Right, that were trusting of law enforcement and said, "Hey, wait a second, this guy, look, he wasn't a threat anymore, and look what still happened to him." And that's the part that makes it so hard. So when we saw that, most of us were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this guy just did," because I think he set law enforcement back like 25 years.
When you say the stat that 10 unarmed blacks versus 20 unarmed whites were shot, that's still disproportionate. Even though it sounds like it's less blacks only make up 13% of the population. So to have 10 versus 20, but it's 13% versus 70% of the population, that's disproportionate.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. But there's also, listen, you can't get into all the stats. I'd love to see a breakdown of everything. Now, when you talk about statistics, right, and you just look at 10 and 20, now you're talking about population. Now you have to start talking about percentage of crimes. And then you have to talk about the violent crimes and what led to each situation. So it's very difficult. There was a study that was done, I think it was last year or the year before. It was a poll that was done amongst active police officers. And it showed that more police officers are less likely to pull their gun out or don't want to pull their gun out when they're dealing with a black situation because of fear of all the stuff that's going on right now. I'll find the stats. I'll send it to you, because nobody wants to be the next white police officer that shoots a black person. Nobody wants to be that person, right? So, and that becomes dangerous because you're thinking, like, that's what people don't understand about law enforcement. You have to deal with human emotions, your cognizant intelligence, law, tactics, humanity, all of that stuff. But in a split-second decision, you have to process all of that stuff. And I get the fact that, yes, that is our job. And that's the job that we signed up to do. But it's a very difficult job, right? And you have to think of all of that stuff when you're thinking about threat assessment and do I want to go home at the end of the night? It's a ton to deal with. In a blink of an eye, sometimes you have to react. And when you start thinking about, well, I don't want to be that next guy, next thing you know, you're getting carried by 6 people. So it's a very fine, thin line that you have to walk, and you have to try to balance all that stuff, and it's not very easy.
Wow. So what tips would you give to people? I know you said, like, with building the relationships, for like, if we were to talk to some people about how to handle dealing with the police moving forward to, like you said, de-escalate the situation, what steps would you give? How, if I get pulled over by you, what tips would you give me?
So the first thing I think that everybody needs to understand is, listen, there are good cops out there and there are bad cops out there. There are aggressive cops out there and there are passive cops out there. There are cops out there that, you know, want to feel like they're in control and have power. And then there are cops out there that want to just like talk to you and they want to treat you, you know, just like you're anybody else. There's all we're human, right? So that goes for doctors, everybody. So there's humanity that goes into this. So what you want to do, first of all, police officers, again, should never want to escalate the situation. You should always want to de-escalate it. But if you are being spoken to by a police officer, if you are being pulled over by a police officer, you need to comply. Now, the reason why I said what I said leading up to it is because if that cop is pulling you over or doing something for the wrong reasons, right then on the spot is not the place to argue your case, right? Sometimes you have to swallow your pride, take the L for whatever it is, and go home, right? And what happens is a lot of times, cops too, we let our ego and pride get in the way. Right now, I watched a black reporter on CNN get arrested the other day. Now, I don't know why he was arrested. He had his credentials out. He was in the middle of the protest. They chose to arrest him. Now, apparently, not too far away was another reporter with another camera crew, and he happened to be white, and he was perfectly fine. I don't know what the reason was why they locked him up. But all I do know is I saw a black man put his hands behind his back, completely comply, and get arrested. Now, if that was a non-legal arrest, that man's going to have a tremendous lawsuit, okay? Those police officers are probably going to get fired. But you know what? Guess where that reporter was the very next day? Back on the street reporting the news, okay? He didn't mother F the cops, start throwing punches and get into a fist fight in the middle of the street where something bad happened. So, you know, I spoke with Eric Thomas in Chicago, and he even said, he told his son, you shut your mouth, you take the L, you come home, then we'll deal with it. So if I'm a mother of anybody, my kids too, listen, I don't care if you're white or black, whatever it is. If I'm a parent, you get pulled over by the police, you put your hands on the steering wheel. Yes, sir. No, sir. License and registration. It's in the glove compartment. Can I reach for it? Yes, you can. Here it is. Not, why did you pull me over? Not, no, I don't have to give that to you. No, what? No, you're like, there's none of that stuff. Worst case scenario, you get a ticket. Okay, a ticket. And you go home. Now, if it's a bad stop, if the police officer did something wrong, you go home, you tell your parent, or if you're an adult, you drive to the police precinct and you file a complaint. But you're home and you're alive. You know, and that doesn't mean that every car stop ends in a police officer killing somebody either. There's millions of car stops every single day, right? That go with just listen, I give people tickets and they say thank you. And I walk back to my car and they drive off on their way, right? So, you know, the time and the place to fight for your reasoning of why you should, it doesn't happen on the street. It happens in a courtroom. As a police officer, when you're walking up to a vehicle, you don't know what's inside the car. I'll show you video after video after video of police officers walking up to a car, and before they could say license and registration, getting shot in the face. Right? So a car stop is one of the most dangerous situations you could be in as a police officer. So there's anxiety on the police side. There's anxiety on the civilian side because they're getting pissed off because they're going to be getting a ticket, right? Or they think they're getting a ticket, or maybe they have a warrant, or maybe they have pot in the car, or maybe they're doing something, they just did something wrong. So it's never a good interaction when you're getting pulled over by the police. You know, I think there needs to be more cops that are in their own communities that are doing stuff like this to help them navigate through being an adolescent, because the last thing you want is a kid to make a stupid kid mistake and to lose his life because of it.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
I really enjoy helping people, and I want to be one of the people who are part of the solution here with this problem that we're having right now. So that's